Man, it's hard to believe we're already up to episode 9 on the Beezy's Stream of Consciousness podcast. I can't believe it. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. This is episode 9. And I am Beezy, your friendly neighborhood host, coming to you from the Starbase One studio, courtesy of Audacity and Podbean. And today's show is brought to you by Pontiac Motor Division, where at Pontiac we build excitement. And the music of Iron Maiden, Release Your Inner Maiden. And musical intro and outro by Soundroll. Appreciate that. But yeah, this is episode 9, and I was thinking about the show last night before I drifted off into slumber. And I decided, I could do some silly stuff. I could do some of my random stuff, or I could start reading one of my books to you. And I actually had a request for that from one of my numerous, that is sarcasm by the way, listeners. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get out Cloaks and Barbs, which is one of my books, and I'm going to start reading it to you. And I'll read a little bit every day until we're done. But we'll do other show things. But today the lion's share of the show is going to be that. So prepare yourself for the next half hour, 45 minutes to an hour. Let's do a little reading and listening, okay? So I'll be back with the book in 2 shakes. All right. I've got Cloaks and Barbs in hand. It's a book that I wrote several years ago. It is available on Amazon. You can order it. It is Cloaks, Cloaks, and Barbs, Barbs, and it is a novel by Joseph M. Bailey. It's got some interesting cover art that your author put together himself. It shows a strange cloaked figure with glowing eyes. You can't see his face, but you can see the cloak. Underneath is the Nazi military flag. Underneath is a picture of old Schicklgruber himself. Next to both of those is looks like a whack or a wave female officer from World War II era with a headset on, looking over at the alien with a concerned look on her face. And underneath all of them is a shot of a World War II submarine. And all of that will come together. On the back cover is a picture of the author that was taken by my eldest, Layla, and so we will go through it here. Opening up. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are fictitiously used, and any resemblance to actual persons living or dead, business establishments, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Cloaks and Barbs, all rights reserved, copyright 2008 by Joseph M. Bailey, author photo by Layla Bailey, copyright. This book or parts thereof may not be reproduced in any form without permission. For information, it gives my information and the ISBN number. It is in the Library of Congress, which is really cool. The dedication page says, "For Mom, Dad, and Susan." And then the acknowledgments. There are certain iconic names that come out of every conflict in our nation's history. George Washington and John Paul Jones from the Revolutionary War, Andrew Jackson from the War of 1812, Generals Lee, Grant, and Sherman from the Civil War, Admiral Dewey from the Spanish-American War, Black Jack Pershing from World War I, and names like Eisenhower, Patton, Bradley, Nimitz, Halsey, Spruance, and MacArthur from World War II. A funny thing happened in World War II, however. Naval vessels became nearly as famous as the men who served on them. To be sure, most people had heard of ships like Old Ironsides, the Monitor, the Merrimack, and the Maine by the time that America was drawn into the Second World War, but the sheer number of iconic ships to come out of that conflict was vast. Everyone knows about the two vessels that marked the beginning and end of America's involvement in that war, the battleships Arizona and Missouri, and most have heard of these ships as well, the aircraft carriers Enterprise, Essex, Hornet, Yorktown, Lexington, and Intrepid, the battleships Pennsylvania, South Dakota, and Iowa, cruisers Indianapolis, Vincennes, and Baltimore, destroyers and frigates Fletcher, Laffey, and Samuel B. Roberts, and motor torpedo boat PT-109, as well as the submarines Drum, Nautilus, Darter, Dace, Wahoo, Tautog, and Barb. The USS Barb, SS-220, was a Gato-class fleet submarine built by the Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut. She and her sisters formed the backbone of the American submarine fleet for the majority of the war, although representatives of several other classes gave brave and distinguished service as well to the war effort. From October 1942 until the end of hostilities in August 1945, she sailed on 12 war patrols and sank more enemy tonnage than any other American boat, this according to Japanese sources. Her sailors even blew up a Japanese locomotive, giving her the nickname the sub that sank a train. One of her skippers, Eugene B. Fluke, was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for the exploits of Barb's 11th War Patrol. She was a highly successful boat with a staggering list of victories and accomplishments. She finished her work in the Atlantic in July 1943 and joined the Pacific Fleet 2 months later. It is during this 2-month period that the following tale is set, a tale that is a tribute to all of our submariners in general and the officers and men of Barb in particular. I would like nothing better than to tip my hat to everyone who made Cloaks and Barbs possible, but the list, too, is staggering. Of course, my family deserves special recognition. Susan, who has stood by my side for 4 decades in good times and in bad, and has put up with me while I tried to support the family and write books. Eldest daughter Layla helped me with the cover art and photography, 2 facets of the book which gave me fits. Paige, Mom, Dad, Tex all read the manuscript and gave me valuable encouragement and critiques, as did my BDC buddy Tom, sisters Kathy and Jan, and dear friend Zip, Admiral Steve, Sean, and Sir Rodney provided much needed and much appreciated moral support. And finally, a special thanks to Jeff, who helped me with some maddening format and computer details. The prologue. 5613 Oakmont Lane, Fort Worth, Texas, April 13th, 2007. The old man rose at his customary 4:30 a.m. and shuffled slowly from the warm bed to the darkened bathroom. It took him exactly 10 minutes to scrape the overnight stubble from his face, insert his dentures, and don his outfit for the day: plaid button-down shirt, khaki trousers, and white sneakers. He emerged refreshed and made his way quietly through the sprawling, quiet house to the darkened kitchen. There he made his morning coffee and toast while he waited for the newspaper to be delivered. The coffee drip machine was soon done, and he poured the black, steaming liquid into a heavy white mug that had no handle. He drank it strong and black, a habit for him that had stretched back over 70 years. He sipped at it slowly and thoughtfully as he peered out of the kitchen window and waited for the world to brighten with the morning sun. It was going to be a good day, he reflected. Of course, at his age, every day that he awoke was a good day, although his heart often ached over his deceased family and friends, and he sometimes longed for the day that he would no longer awake in his bed, but perhaps instead in another place, a place where he would once again be surrounded by faces that were now only memories. He felt fairly certain that he would not be undertaking that particular journey today, and instead looked forward to the visit of his son and grandsons. He smiled as he thought of their smiling, eager faces and their innumerable questions about his life, questions that he never tired of answering. He munched his toast and drained his mug, refilling it as he would do many more times this day. Outside, the dawn slowly stole across the sky, making the eastern horizon glow red and orange. Presently, a small, dilapidated pickup truck rambled up his street as rolled-up newspapers flew from its windows. One of these hit squarely on the sidewalk before the house, and he ambled out to fetch it. It was cooler than he had suspected, and the cool, damp air made his 95-year-old joints ache. He didn't mind, though. The aches reminded them that he was indeed alive. He took his time walking back to the house and unrolled the paper as was his habit. He scanned the front page and saw a small item near the bottom that caught his eye. City celebrates Navy launch of namesake submarine. A small smile crept around the wizened corners of his mouth, and he walked back inside. Several hours later, he sat at his desk in his study, flipping through an ancient scrapbook. He had had a very relaxing morning after reading the paper from front to back. He had gone for a walk on the golf course that adjoined the back of his property. This, as well as the numerous cups of strong coffee, had him fully alert and anxious to see his family. He was also particularly interested to talk with his grandsons about the story in the paper about the Navy's newest submarine, USS Fort Worth. The boys, like their father and grandfather, shared a particular fascination with submarines. He stopped flipping the old yellow pages of the album and rose to refill his mug and make a quick bathroom break. These were becoming all too frequent, a product of his old age and lots of coffee, but they were far from troublesome. A few moments later, as he washed his hands, he heard the doorbell ring. He opened the front door and saw 5 smiling faces. "Grandpa!" cried the youngest, who immediately dashed through the door and wrapped his arms around the old man's legs. "Whoa, whoa there, sailor," laughed the old man as the others came through the door, each shaking his hand. The last of them, the father of the 4 boys, embraced him warmly. "Good morning, Dad," said the man. "And to you, Bobby," said he, smiling at his son. "It's been a while. Come on inside." Later, Vice Admiral Robert Jeffrey Dunaway, Sr., U.S. Navy retired, sat at the head of his kitchen table as his son and grandsons plowed through a lunch of cold cuts, chips, and potato salad. The old admiral enjoyed cold cuts and always kept a supply of them on hand: corned beef, roast beef, smoked turkey, honey ham, bologna, hard salami, pastrami, and chicken breast. He always got them shaved thin at the local supermarket deli, where he had also bought several cheeses: Swiss, sharp cheddar, provolone, and pepper jack. He would stack them on various rye breads, Russian, Jewish, and dark, garnished with spicy brown mustard, lettuce, tomato, pickle, and red onions. He never referred to them as cold cuts, instead calling them mid-rats, something his family understood. "You saw where they launched Fort Worth yesterday, Dad?" asked Commodore Robert Bobby Dunaway, Jr., U.S. Navy Reserve, around mouthfuls of his corned beef sandwich. "I did," replied the elder Dunaway as he spooned potato salad into his mouth. "I also see that Jack Waterman is their skipper." Bobby and his eldest son, Jeff, stopped chewing their sandwiches and looked at the old man. "John Waterman was Barb's first captain, wasn't he?" asked Jeff, who appeared to be a taller, thinner version of his father and grandfather. "Jack would be his grandson," said the admiral, turning to Bobby. "Do you know him?" "No, sir, although I know of him. He was 3 years behind me at the academy, I believe." "If he's anything like his granddad," "He is," assured the admiral. "Then he'll make one fine sub-driver." Robert smiled. "Takes one to know one." All 4 of the boys looked at their dad and beamed. They'd looked forward to this visit for weeks, and they cherished the few times that they got to see their grandfather, and cherished even more seeing the old man and their father together. A compliment from the old admiral was high praise indeed. "When do you shove off for Annapolis, Jeffrey?" Robert asked, even though he knew the answer. "Not until June 15th, sir," said Jeff. "After graduation next month, I'll go up to Groton and spend 2 weeks with Commander Underwood and his family. He's arranged a couple of check rides for me." "You're so lucky," exclaimed the next oldest boy, Scott. "I won't be able to take a ride until Fleet Week, and then it'll only be out and back. You'll actually get to go on sea trials." The 2 youngest boys, Nate and Frank, shared a look. "Sea trials?" asked Frank. "Yep, that's right," said Jeff. "Commander Underwood will have Toledo ready to go by then, and I'll get to spend 2 weeks with him in the North Atlantic." "You'll learn a lot," said Robert. "Keep your eyes and your ears open, son." "Aye, aye, sir," said Jeff, sitting ramrod straight in his seat. "I'm looking forward to it." "I'll bet you are. I remember the first time I got to ride aboard a sub for more than a few hours." "Really?" said Nate and Frank together, eager to hear some of their grandfather's sea stories. "What was it like?" The old man chuckled. "It was cold as hell and raining to beat the band," he said. "I was a midshipman and had just volunteered for sub duty." His eyes took on a faraway look, and he leaned forward in his chair, his lunch temporarily forgotten. "It was plebe year, 1931 for me, and they were taking sub-candidates and 2s and 3s out in the old O and S boats so they could evaluate whether or not they could handle it. You handled it, didn't you, Grandpa? Asked Nate, his young face alight. Not hardly. I did eventually, Nathan, but that first day I spent most of my time puking into the bilges. The boys all made faces, but Bobby smiled, having experienced seasickness before. The seas were 6 or 7 feet, and the wind was whipping everything around. They had me on S-21, a good old boat to be sure, but she leaked like a sieve and couldn't dive more than 150, maybe 200 feet. Well, that old boat was rolling side to side, pitching up and down, and I was so sick I couldn't see straight. You got to remember, I was just a 19-year-old kid back then, and I didn't know my ass from first base. The younger boys snickered at that, while the older ones grinned embarrassed. Well, the skipper finally was able to get far enough out that he could dive the boat, and the rocking stopped. Big burly chief helped get me back to my feet and escorted me to the control room where I watched the diving watch move that old boat all over the North Atlantic. I was so fascinated with all the evolutions that I soon forgot the seasickness and started asking questions. It turned out to be the best 3 days of my life up to that point. After that, wild horses couldn't have dragged me away from subs. The truth was that Bobby and his boys had heard that story dozens of times before, but they never got tired of it, nor did Robert tire of telling it. They loved the way the old man's twinkles when he talked of his submarine duty. The only other time they did that was when Robert thought of his late wife, Barbara. In fact, his eyes would often mist over when he thought of her, and his proud voice would catch and fall into a whisper. Her memory was one of the only 2 things that could bring the old man to tears. "Hey, Grandpa," said Nate suddenly, "tell us the story about the berserkers." "The berserker," Jeff corrected his brother. Robert looked up and shot his son a withering gaze. "Where did they hear about that?" he asked sharply. The boys had never heard their grandfather use that tone in a long time, and they all looked at him with wide eyes. Bobby cleared his throat and began tearing the crust off of sandwich bread. "Well, it's been declassified for several months, Dad," he said, unable to meet the old man's stare. "I didn't tell the boys anything, really." He looked up at his father. "I figured that you would tell them." "When was it declassified?" Robert demanded. "I wasn't notified. I'm still on the list, you know." He paused and looked around the table at his grandchildren, who were all staring at him with their mouths open. He shook his head and looked pointedly at Bobby. "Son," he said in a somewhat softer tone, "that's not really a good tale to share." "Why not?" Bobby persisted. "That's how you met Mom, after all." He gestured to the boys. "They're all going to find out one of these days. It's all over the internet. Jeff will hear about it at the academy next fall. I'd really rather have them hear it from you first. After all, you lived it." "I know." Robert seemed to deflate in his chair. He looked down at his plate and sat back slowly. He closed his eyes and the memories began flooding back, propelling him back to another time. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" asked young Frank. Robert opened his now moist eyes and looked at the boy, whose brow was furrowed with concern. He cleared his throat. "Of course I am, Frankie," he said as he pulled a silk handkerchief from his back pocket. He wiped his nose and leaned forward. "Then can you tell us all about the berserkers?" asked the boy earnestly. "Berserker, you nitwit," said Jeff. "Get it right." "It's all right, Jeffrey," said the Admiral. "Now then," he said to Bobby, "you're absolutely sure this is declassified because, Dad, on my honor," Bobby said. "If you don't believe me, I can show you on the Navy website." Nate giggled. "Grandpa doesn't even have a computer, Dad." "Of course he does," Bobby protested. "I got him one for Christmas, remember?" "Yeah, but he didn't even hook it up," said the boy, who turned to look at Robert. "Did you, Grandpa?" Robert smirked and blushed, but stayed silent. Bobby's eyes widened and he glared at his father. "Dad?" he asked accusingly. "I thought that was going to be our secret," Robert said, to the boy sotto voce, although he was smiling. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," the lad whispered back. "Don't send me to captain's mast, okay?" "No, Commander," said Robert mock formally, sitting up straight and giving his son a smart salute. "I regret to inform you that the aforementioned gear is still packed and ready for shipment." "Dad, I thought you wanted a computer." Bobby shook his head and started laughing. "Why in the world did you ask for one if you didn't want to use it?" "I thought a certain future plebe who shall remain nameless might find better use for it this fall," Robert continued, speaking as if he were before a military tribunal. Jeff looked at his grandfather and his mouth fell open. "Are you sure, sir?" he asked. Of course, said the old man. I'm too old to want to fool with those damn things anyway. No, I kept it back for you so that you wouldn't have to take some old cipher box to school. He winked at Bobby. That's why I asked for the Highline model with all the bells and whistles. I understand it's what all the kids are taking to school these days. Back in my day, we felt lucky to have an abacus. He cackled at his own joke, though the younger boys looked puzzled. Never mind, boys. Okay, Bobby said, nodding. Now it makes sense. I wondered why you wanted all that fancy stuff when you told me what to get. Good call, Dad. Jeff looked back and forth at his father and his grandfather excitedly. Are you guys serious? He asked breathlessly. They both nodded, and the youth jumped up, knocking over his iced tea as he came around the table to shake the old man's hand and give him a hug. Thanks, Grandpa, he said. My pleasure, kid. He gratefully accepted the lad's embrace. I've got it for you in the study. As Jeff pulled away from him, grinning, Robert said, and I also have some things in there to show you about der Bersucher, if you still want to hear that tale. Yes, sir, they all said at once. They retired to the Admiral's study, where Admiral Dunaway kept 50 years' worth of naval memorabilia. It was the old man's sanctum sanctorum, but for his son and grandsons it was a priceless treasure trove. On the walls were framed photographs of every ship on which Robert had served. The submarines S-49, Mackerel, Porpoise, Barb, Sea Leopard, and Blueback, and the submarine tender Proteus. There were also pictures of then Captain Dunaway shaking hands with President Dwight Eisenhower, then Commodore Dunaway with President John Kennedy, and finally shots of him with Admiral stars on his shoulders with Presidents Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan. There were others of him with Admiral Hyman Rickover, Secretaries of the Navy Chaffee, Warner, and Lehman, as well as several other naval officers, most of whom were unknown to the grandchildren. There were many black and whites of him as a midshipman and as a junior officer, but the ones that drew the most attention from the boys were those of a young Robert Dunaway with a striking brunette on his arm. In most of them, the young woman was wearing a female officer's uniform. Wow, exclaimed Scott in wonder. Look at you, Grandpa. You were so young. That drew a laugh from the old man. Indeed I was, Scooter, he said, patting the boy's shoulder. Nate and Frank were staring at a gleaming ship's bell on the Admiral's desk next to a photograph of the brunette, this one obviously later in life as her hair was graying and the lines around her eyes were deep. Where'd you get this one, Grandpa? Asked Frank, looking at his reflection on the surface of the bell. That came off of Sea Leopard, he replied. My first full-time command. That bell's got lots of memories wrapped up inside it. Bobby was more interested in a picture of Lieutenant Commander Dunaway with a female Navy ensign. I've not seen this one before, Dad, he said softly. If you had 2.5 stripes and Mom had 1.5, that must have been right around 1943, Robert said. That was taken in England, right before your mother and I got hitched. He came over and stood next to his son, gazing quietly into the old, faded photograph. I found it in one of your mother's albums shortly after she passed. Well, if that was 43 and you were both in England, mused Bobby, then that would be about the time that... Yes, Robert said. That was right after it all happened. After what happened, Grandpa? Asked Scott. Robert sat down behind his desk. Pull up some chairs, boys, he said, looking at the picture of the woman on his desk. I'm going to tell you a story that no one has heard, nobody but your grandmother and me, that is, in over 60 years. You're going to tell us about the berserkers? Asked Nate as he sat on the floor next to his grandfather. No one corrected him this time, but instead they all found places around the old man's desk where they waited for Robert to speak. Robert opened his middle desk drawer and withdrew a manila envelope that was bursting with yellowed papers and faded photographs, and that was secured with a thick rubber band. He pulled the elastic off and reverently opened the folder. The first thing he withdrew was a large picture of him as a much younger man wearing officer's khakis, standing on the deck of a submarine with a smiling female officer at his side. Yes, Nathan, he said as he handed the boy the picture. I'll tell you all about the berserkers and the Germans, and most importantly about a very special boat and a very special bell, both named Barb. And there you go. That is the prologue to Cloaks and Barbs. And we will move on to the introduction tomorrow. And in the meanwhile, we got a few other things to go over, so don't go away. All right, I am back, and just wanted to remind everybody, in case the NSA is listening, or I have any narcs listening, since I am the copyright holder of the aforementioned book, it is not a violation of copyright laws for me to read my own work. So just so we get that out of the way, and we can move on to more mundane matters. But I do have some questions, just a few that maybe you can help me out with. So this is some of Beezy's deep random thoughts. Give you a glimpse inside my head. Why do they call it rush hour when nothing moves? Now, I do have to give a hat tip to Robin Williams' Mork for Mork character in Mork and Mindy. It was a great show that ran on ABC from 77 to 82. Robin Williams was the alien Mork who came to Earth and was living with Mindy, played by Pam Dauber, who is the missus to NCIS's Mark Harmon. Jonathan Winters also played their son in later episodes, but I'll let you watch reruns of that to figure that out. Morgan Fairchild made a couple of appearances. Conrad Janis also co-starred in it, and the rest of the gang. So that's just a quick aside. So next question. If a $1 bill is a single, and a $5 bill is a fiver or a Fitzky, a $10 bill is a sawbuck, a $20 bill is a Benjamin, a $100 bill is a C-note, then what is a $2 bill? A deuce? I thought that was a Ford two-door. That shows my age. Then what's a $50 bill? A grant? I thought that was something that you got from Uncle Sam when you needed to fund him to fund his study or something. I don't know. Very odd. Next question. If Iceland is really green and Greenland is really icy, does Ireland really calm you down? Since that would be the opposite of being irate or having ire. And does England... No, never mind. Move on to the next one. And the question everybody's always asking, how much wood can a woodchuck really chuck? I think I got that wrong. But that's a question. Never seen a woodchuck chuck wood. There's a quantity in there that I need to know. Bert Lahr once famously asked, what put the ape in apricot? Next time you see a lion, ask him. What else do we got? Well, let's take a look here. Here's one for you. A pint can only hold a pint. It can't hold a quart, and when it's holding a pint, it's doing the very best it can. Again, in order to not get in trouble with the authorities, I do have to give a hat tip to Disney's The Black Hole from 1979. And this is a quote by Vincent, a robot voiced by the great Roddy McDowall. Love that guy. And this isn't a question, this is just declarative. And this is just to let you know how I feel. And finally, thank God, remember that old legends never die, they just lose weight. And that's a line from Smokey and the Bandit, by the way. So, anyway, well, that's going to do it for today's show. I've got some other, as much as I would love to spend the rest of the afternoon reading to you, but I'll save that for tomorrow, something to look forward to. So, at this point, on behalf of my studio crew, our producer Elsa, our engineer Lily, our call screener and resident security officer Finland. Hope you all have a great rest of your day and evening. And as always, live long and prosper. Talk to you tomorrow.